I work from home for a cybersecurity company, and it's not really as interesting as it may seem. I have to be online all night from 10 to 6, scrolling through files full of code to see if anything poses a potential threat is extremely boring, and when combined with the night shift, it makes it harder every night to stay awake. One night just a few weeks ago, I was up at 2 a.m. working and feeling heavy in my eyes. I pushed off the drowsiness for a while, checking my phone. I was hoping over and over that the time had somehow passed 2:40. Although I took a break and decided to order some food to get myself some fuel for the remaining 3 hours of my shift, and opened up Uber Eats, and my only real option was a Taco Bell, so I sent an order and got up to get something to drink while I walked home with the light on. Just the entrance. I woke up more and realized that it was raining outside. I looked out the front window and was surprised at how it was raining. The rain was falling hard. Since I was oblivious to him while working, my first thought was how I just ordered a ride, and I felt really bad that I made someone run in the rain for my convenience. I checked my phone and saw the order had already been received, so I sat on the couch and waited for them to show up about 10 minutes later, and was notified that they had received the order, so I watched the map on Uber Eats as the car made its way through town and eventually to when they were a minute away from the neighborhood I live in. I put my phone down and opened the front door so we could do the open exchange as quickly as possible. I stood at the open door, staring at the end of the road where they were supposed to be coming from, but another 5 minutes passed without seeing any cars. I picked up my phone again, I checked this, but on the map, their car was still in my neighborhood. When I zoomed in, I realized they were just around the corner before turning onto my street. I looked outside again, but I didn't see any light from their car, and my correct reaction was that maybe they had the wrong house or couldn't see the address numbers during the rain. So I tried to call them a few rings, and then they refused, and I tried again, but no luck. Unsure of what exactly was going on, I stayed at the door and waited for another 5 minutes that passed before I tried to call them again. I called, and this time the phone rang for a while, but then they answered, and I asked where they were and if they needed help finding my house, but as I listened to their response, all I heard from their side was the sound of falling rain. After a few more seconds, I ended the call, feeling very strange about that call, and I checked the map. It had not been updated to begin with, but when it happened, it showed them right outside my house. I checked the windows and saw nothing, but knowing that they were walking around in the rain like this gave me a very bad feeling. So I closed the door and locked it, and I swear I was only able to walk a few steps into the hallway before there was a loud knock on the front door. I looked carefully through the peephole. There was a man wearing a gray jacket walking around on the balcony. His head was turning as he was checking for any onlookers, while he was impatiently waiting for me to respond to his Uber Eats delivery. He shouted, but I did not see a bag containing my food anywhere I remained in my place without responding or making any sounds. The man became busier in his movements and called out several more times. Then he suddenly pressed on the door to block my view when I heard some faint scratches on the wood before he quickly ran to the side of my house and disappeared under the roof. I called the police, but his car was already gone, and they told me he was using a fraudulent account. A few days went by with nothing else to report until I noticed a small scratch on the front door of the house that was an above it to hide whatever that mark was supposed to signify. Nate still left me with an uncomfortable feeling in my gut, especially since he was holding something sharp in his hand while he was waiting for me to open the door. Part of me is still convinced that this will not be my last meeting with this unknown person. I was driving through my city to drop off Postmates. On the way back, the day that had just begun, every order was mostly inside the main city buildings, but I had just received an order from off the main roads, so I picked up the food and headed to it. But the further I got from the city, the more the roads became. Less populated with cars and houses, and everything has been replaced by forests. I used to walk this road before, but when I just left the city, I didn't even know there were houses here, and I drove until the GPS told me to turn. On a gravel road that was almost unnoticeable, there were no lights except for the dim lights coming from my old car, while I was walking this thin path through the forest. It was a lot longer than I expected, and it took a full minute to get home, to be honest. This was what I assumed was the reason. and given its isolated location in the woods, it was old and made almost entirely of wood, with vines growing outside the house, and there were a few lights inside shining through the windows. But if it wasn't there, maybe... I was going to think twice before approaching him. I checked the bag, looked for everything, then went up to the front door and pressed the doorbell, which didn't really work, so I had to knock on the door. As soon as I arrived, I hit the door with my hand, although it opened carefully, and I opened it a little further and called, "I have an order here from Postmates." After a moment, I called back to anyone in the house. There were no sounds coming from inside, but all the lights I could see were through the apartment in the hallway. I could see a TV in the living room. It was on, but it was silent, and I don't know how else to explain my thoughts, but the feelings were just off, and I knew something was wrong with this. I turned around and went back to my car, where I got in and started turning in a U-shape. Immediately, I felt a problem with the steering. My car was struggling to move across the gravel, and I felt bumps and extreme tension, so I got out and my face turned cold. When I saw that my front tire was flat, I moved my eyes to the other tires, and each one of them was also flat, and not just a little deflated, but completely flat. My stomach dropped immediately. I know this was an intentional act. At that moment, my mind was all over the place. What terrified me was that I did not know if someone had put something on the road or if someone had come while I was at home and done this behind my back. Either way, the only thing I knew was that someone was out here with me in the woods in the middle of nowhere. I got back into my car and locked the doors, trying to call 911, but I had no call. As I was browsing through the few options available to me, I saw a light on in the house and the door opened. It widened and revealed a man in the doorway. Without any hesitation, he started walking quickly towards my car. I did not doubt myself this time and forced my car to pass through the gravel. In the mirror, I saw the man stop and stare at. When I was on the main road, I took it more carefully while driving slowly to avoid damaging my car until I got enough signal to call 911. But what happened next was just as terrifying. That house was owned and lived in by a single mother with 2 children. They all said they were in the house. They are sleeping in their rooms at the time I claimed this happened, and they did not ask for anything or see any man or even find anything missing in their house. And I do not know if they were there in one way or another or if they were a victim like me. Why did the man ask for food? Home and tearing up my tires still doesn't make sense to me, even though it's the only thing. What I thought about was that maybe he was planning to do something terrible to that family, and I was about to be held responsible in some way for being on the property at the exact time a crime could have been committed, and that may be going too far, but if... That's right. I will run away, and I may have saved more lives than just being... Delivery driver. This was not my first choice of job in my late 20s, but I was laid off while working at home, and the only place that worked was a local pizza shop, which was a popular place in our city. But in reality, it was just basic pizza. Anyway, this was during a time when everyone was staying inside and ordering deliveries, so I was working overtime and staying busy until closing every night at 1 a.m. This was just another day of running deliveries all over the city. Around 12, we received a call to order 4 large pizzas to a home located outside of town about 30 minutes away. I accepted the order knowing that it would be my last order anyway, and it was a large order, so the payment will likely offset the amount paid. I drove longer, and by 12:15 I reached home, and the road was nothing to notice as all the roads were empty, and no one was outside due to the ongoing mandatory lockdowns when. I arrived at the address, although I was immediately confused. There was a corridor with a large open gate that looked like it belonged to a large palace of some kind, but at the end of the corridor there was nothing. It was just a dead end with forest everywhere except for the trees, which were not far away. There was a glowing light. I pulled it on and went in, parked the car in the middle of the corridor, and got out. Now, as I stood outside, I could see more clearly that it was a campfire or a bonfire of some kind, and I could hear a group of people talking. After a moment, a figure stood in front of the glowing fire. Light from the fire waved at me as if he was inviting me to bring pizza. So no more. Saying this wasn't normal in any way, but seeing them waving at me and hearing a group of people gave me more than enough reason to think it was just a bunch of college kids hanging out. I mean, they ordered 4 large pizzas, so it all piled up in my head. I got pizza from the back seat and I left the headlights on. As I started to walk out of the driveway and into the trees, a few people appeared in the light. As I approached them, everyone was watching me walk towards them. When I reached the fire, there were 6 other people standing and sitting in the area. Strangely, none of them were happy about the pizza being here, and there was nothing else on the patio. There were no bottles of beer or drinks of any kind, and there were no music players or games, just a group of people hanging out around a blazing fire. I stood on the edge of the site and I held the pizza awkwardly, hoping that one of them would come take the pizza from me and pay me so that I could go, and one of them took the pizza and handed it to someone else. This place had a strange feeling coming over me, making me feel uncomfortable with every second that passed before I could even do that. You asked. He paid for the food, but I heard the sound of some steps approaching, and some people came out of the forest and approached the fire, and I was standing in front of about 12, and they all looked at me and did not say anything. I became trembling with fear. I decided not to take the money and go from here without any money. Any injury, I quickly turned around and started walking to the car and looking back. I found all the people still standing like statues, and when I left the place, my heart nearly stopped from fear. I went and got into the car and made sure of all the things inside the car. The car moved quickly to the main road to stay away from this place. When I returned to the store and told my manager about the strange situation, fortunately, the police and I went to the same place, and when we arrived to find nothing but the fire still burning but left unattended. What actually happened that night is unknown, and as far as I can see, it is likely to remain that way.